Welcome to the StateDefenseForce.com podcast. My name is Justin Stanton, and on today's episode, I have the distinct honor of speaking with the Commanding General of the Georgia State Defense Force, Brigadier General Mark D. Gelhardt, Sr. But before we get started, since this is my first time hosting the State Defense Force podcast, I wanted to give a little background on who I am and why I'm hosting this show. I've served in the Texas State Guard for the past 8 years. I spent 6 of those years in recruiting before moving on to build an initial entry training program for new members. My service provided me with some of the most challenging and rewarding experiences in my life. I've developed a huge amount of respect and admiration for the people who raise their hands and swear their oath to protect and serve the citizens of their states and this nation. It's an undeniable fact that the State Defense Forces are some of the best kept secrets around, and it's my hope that by sharing these discussions with both key leaders of the different components, as well as people just starting out in their service, that we can expose the public at large to the missions, opportunities, and rewards that they can find by serving in their own State Defense Force. With that said, it's my privilege to introduce General Mark D. Gelhardt, Sr., Commander of the Georgia State Defense Force. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I enjoy telling stories, and I hope I can tell some useful stories today.
Outstanding. I'm looking forward to it. I've been reading through your biography, and it's just packed with all kinds of interesting information. You started out in ROTC at the University of Florida?
There was a story on how I got into ROTC because I was not a military person. Okay. I was a long-haired hippie in the 70s. And I was not going to go into the service. This was right at the end of Vietnam. I had my draft number, but draft had already stopped. My brothers were both hippies, and I was not going to go into the service, not going to go in that direction. However, because of a young lady, a recruiter, by the way, a ROTC recruiter, a cadet, she talked me into just swinging by and seeing what ROTC was all about. And I figured that I had skills. I had the same skills that they were doing in ROTC. I knew how to hunt. I knew how to fish. I knew how to camp. I knew how to do different things. And my grades weren't that good. So I figured I'd take a course just like basket weaving. In my case, instead of basket weaving, I took ROTC so I could improve my grades. And after 2 years of ROTC, my freshman and sophomore years, I found out I was relatively good at some of the things they asked me to do. I found out I was relatively good and that people would actually listen to what I had to say. I think leaders have a little of born with the skill, and I think leaders learn the skill. Well, I don't think I was really born with the skill, but I think over the years I've learned the skill, and I've improved on what I've had in the past. I joined ROTC because the job market was poor, my grades were bad, and I needed to do something to belong to a team. I wanted esprit de corps. I wanted camaraderie. I wanted fellowship. I joined a fraternity at the same time I joined ROTC, and I spent more time doing ROTC stuff than I did fraternity stuff. And that's what started me on my journey in the military, the fellowship of the soldier, the person, the troop next to you, the things you could share, the things you could do together, and how a team can get a lot more accomplished than an individual. I always thought team sports were great. The Army is the best team sport there is. So I started in ROTC. That got me into the service, and then I went straight into exciting things. I went in the 82nd Airborne Division, jumped out of airplanes, went to winter warfare school in Alaska, parachuted on the Mount McKinley, now Mount Takali, lived off the land at minus 40-degree weather for 2 weeks, and winter warfare school. Absolutely hated it, but enjoyed what I learned. Came back from that, and they wanted to send me someplace cold. I said, I don't want to go someplace cold. I said, what school can I go to that will take that away? And they say, well, if you go to Jungle Expert School, you don't have to go to someplace cold. So I volunteered again to go to Jungle Expert School in Panama, jumped into the Panamanian jungle and lived off the land, eating snakes and bugs and grubs for 2 weeks and hiked my way out as we attacked targets. So I had a rather unique start because it sounds like I was an infantry guy, and I wasn't. I'm an HR guy. I'm an adjutant general. I'm a paper pusher. I've always been a paper pusher. I'm an IT geek, communications guy, intelligence guy, paper pusher. But I've probably got more field time than most normal infantry and combat armed soldiers. because I ended up going from a unique assignment to unique assignment to unique assignment because I kept volunteering for what no one else wanted. And that's part of the story about the State Defense Force, volunteerism, doing something for others while you're doing something for yourself. I continued to volunteer for more than 20 years of active service. That volunteer process took me all the way to the White House. I volunteered to work at the White House. I was turned down several times. I set my own career. I went directly to the decision maker and said, hey, I want to come work for you at the White House. And they said, this is not the way it's done. I said, this is the type of person you're going to get if you hire me. I found out what his private phone number was, what his private fax machine number was. I found out what he drank for coffee in the morning. I found out when his secretary wasn't going to be at the desk to answer his private phone. And I called him directly while I faxed him my packet for the White House while I talked to him on the phone. I said, give me 5 minutes and I'll convince you I'm the person you want to work for you. He gave me 5 minutes. He said, this is not the way it's done. And I go, that's fine. My packet's in your fax machine behind you, next to your half-filled black coffee cup that's right next to your fax machine. If you don't think I'm the right person, that's okay. He goes, how did you know what coffee I drink? How did you know what color my coffee cup is? How do you know what my fax machine was? How do you know what my private phone number is? And I said, that's the type of officer you're going to get if you hire me. Well, long story short, I got hired. Worked there for 5 years with President Clinton as the head of the information technology services at the White House, managing all the classified communications. One thing led to another. I got to the end of my military career and I ended up in Georgia. That's where my wife wanted to go. She had followed me for more than 20 years around the world. I said, where do you want to end up? She wanted to go back to Georgia. We had been here before. And we got to Georgia, got out of the service. I went into the civilian sector, became a CIO of an airline, double, triple my salary from the military service because we don't serve for money. We serve because of pride. We serve because of country. But I got out and I lost the camaraderie. I lost the fellowship. I lost the leadership. I was working in the civilian sector with people that were CEOs of companies, that were leaders of companies, and had no concept of what taking care of the troop, taking care of the individual employee was, taking care of the soldier. And I lost that. So I looked around in my community and I said, what can I do to give me the fix I need? So I joined the volunteer fire department. I had joined volunteer fire departments throughout my military career. I spent more than 30 years as a volunteer firefighter supporting local communities. There is no bigger rush than helping someone on the side of the road that thinks there's nothing for them. So I love helping people, and that's what brought me to the State Defense Force.
Wow, that is an incredible story. I identify with a lot of things that you added in there. I never served in federal service, but I did do ROTC when I was in college at the University of Texas. And that camaraderie, that experience there, I think is what actually eventually led me to come back to find a State Defense Force as well. How long has it been since you retired from active service?
I've been out of service for 20 years. I retired 9/11. So I retired on September 2001, right at the exact same time 9/11 happened.
Wow.
So I thought I was going to get called back off of my retirement leave and get stopgap and stay in the service. But because of my background and who I was, they didn't mess with me. They allowed me to retire. And I turned around and actually volunteered to come back on active service if I was needed during the different conflicts after. But as you get older, the young studs need to go to the field, not the old guys.
So you've also served with the Civil Air Patrol. You've served with volunteer fire departments. The Georgia State Defense Force is obviously not your only outlet for volunteer service.
Every individual only has so much time to give to be a volunteer. So yes, I belong to a lot of different organizations, but there's only so many weekends. There's only so many nights, and you can only give of yourself so much. So as I balance the different organizations, I'm also the commander of the American Legion Post. I'm a trustee of a Veterans of Foreign Wars Post. I'm in the Rotary I'm in the Kiwanis Club, but I only have so much time. So as I spend more time with one organization, other organizations get less. I've retired from the fire department. I can no longer carry out a 200-pound firefighter with full pack and gear out of the smokehouse if he was down. And if I can't help my brothers in the time of need, then I need to let someone else that has that skill set do that. So I've retired from the fire department. I still provide support to other volunteer agencies when I have time. Now that I've become the commanding general of the State Defense Force, I have reduced dramatically my support to several other organizations because this is taking up all my time. And I told my wife, I said, for 2 to 3 to 4 years, I'm going to spend 90+% of my time. By the way, I still have a full-time job. So I work full-time as I'm doing these volunteer things, but I have a very understanding boss. I have a very understanding company that supports me. And every time I tell them, well, I'll just retire and do this stuff full-time, they said, no, we still want you to stay. We'll give you the time you need. So I highly encourage anybody that's listening to this podcast. If you want to give back to your community, there's many ways to do it. The State Defense Force is just one of many. So if the State Defense Force isn't right for you, try some of the other things. If some of these other things aren't right for you, try the State Defense Force. Sooner or later, you're going to find the people, the camaraderie, the skill sets that match, and it will give you the return you need. You will be happy because you're doing things for your community. You'll be happy because you're doing things for the state. You'll see things, news articles in the paper showing how your organization did. And later on in this podcast, we're going to talk about what the Georgia State Defense Force did for the state of Georgia during the COVID issues. And we'll talk about how this organization provided direct, needed support to the state at no cost to the state. An individual that has time to volunteer needs to decide what they want to volunteer for. And I'm going to try to convince you that the State Defense Force is what you need to volunteer for right now. And we'll talk about why.
Speaking of the Georgia State Defense Force, let's go ahead and get into that. Can you give us a little background on the history of the Georgia State Defense Force?
The National Guard that we know today is the Minutemen of old. And they've changed. They've got new missions. They can get federalized now after World War II. But what happens when your state's National Guard has to deploy to Afghanistan or to some other country, and a tornado or a hurricane or a flood hits your community? If you have no National Guard to support the governor, what happens to your community? You only have first responders. So the state guard comes from the old 1600s farmer that put down his rake and picked up a weapon to support his community. They not only put down a rake to pick up a weapon, they put down a rake to pick up a hammer to build a church. They put down a rake to pick up a hammer to build a house, to build a schoolhouse, to build a granary where the whole community could use it. The Georgia State Defense Force goes back to the creation of the state of Georgia, just like every other state defense force. And we are here through that time of becoming a state to helping the governor and helping the state in their time of need. In this case, in time of emergencies, such as hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, ice-pocalypse days. And we have all sorts of stories of how the State Defense Force in uniform stood right next to your National Guard. You, the citizen, couldn't tell the difference because we're the same. We have the same standards. We have the same abilities. And I would even say yet we have more abilities than the National Guard does because of the background of our organization. But we came from the old days where people would come together in a community and support their community. That's what the State Defense Force is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with your statement about we have more abilities because of the background of the members. And what I've found to be true in my own state defense force is that because we take people at a later stage in life, people that serve in a state guard typically are between 35 to 50 years of age. They have some sort of establishment in life. educational background, family. They have full-time jobs, and they do this as their extracurricular. And so when we take those people and we bring them in with their many talents, with their many varied experiences, that we use their skills that they've already acquired, and we figure out how to best utilize them within the organization. Where the National Guard would primarily have your 18 to 25-year-olds as their primary demographic of service. Ours is a little bit older.
I would concur with that. And not only would I concur with that statement about a more experienced body of personnel, we also have a more flexible body of personnel. If you're in the National Guard and you get called out, you have to stop what you're doing in your civilian life. You have to give orders to your company saying, I'm being called up. And the legality of calling up a National Guard member, it usually takes 72 hours. I can't call up an armory and say, I want everybody to report to the armory in an hour. The National Guard doesn't work that way. There's laws, there's regulations, there's pay statements, there's paperwork that needs to be done. However, if there's a hurricane that hits the state of Georgia, I can call a State Defense Force member and say, I need you in an hour to report on what's happening in your area. I still work full-time. I have a full-time job. I would tell you that a good number of members of the State Defense Force have full-time jobs. But I also would tell you that I have a lot of retirees. I have a lot of individuals that have swing shifts, that are sheriffs, that are police department personnel that work night shifts and are available during the day. So I have a wide variety of people I can call on, and I don't need 72 hours to be ready. I need about 4 hours to be ready. And I need about an hour to 2 hours to get them to where they need to be. For the last 5 hurricanes that have hit the state of Georgia, that were major hurricanes that did damage, the first member on the ground reporting back to a state center location, GEMA, Georgia Emergency Management, the first people reporting were State Defense Force personnel. The sheriffs, the first responders, they are too busy on the ground rendering aid right away. They're worried about their city, their state, and their county. And they don't have the time to report up to FEMA and GEMA on what's happening. So I can call a State Defense Force member that is not necessarily right in the middle of that area, say, get in your car, drive over there, get on a radio, which we provide radio communication, or get on a cell phone, and we have priority phone calling, and report back to the state central group what needs to be done. We have been on the ground first. We, the Georgia State Defense Force, have been on the ground first for every single emergency since I have been with the State Defense Force, which is about 6-7 years.
What are the special training or the missions that the Georgia State Defense Force trains for?
So we have 3 groups of missions that we train for. We train for military support, where we support the National Guard getting ready to deploy. We do OPT4 or training, where we will come into some of the local military bases. Georgia has quite a few military bases: Fort Stewart, Fort Benning. We have Fort Gordon and Augusta. We have training locations for both Air Force, Air Guard, and the National Guard. And we will go with them and be the opposing force. We will be the villagers they have to interrogate. We will be the villagers that attack them, or the convoy that they have to stop. So we volunteer to do that. We have members we actually have an organization called OPT4, which is one of our command groupings of folks that want to do that mission. We provide military to military support, mill to mill. So the National Guard will say, we have a unit deploying to Afghanistan. We need to train them up. This is the training cycle. We need you guys for a week to be the opposing force. That's one of the missions we have. A second mission we have is a civilian to civilian mission. That's when a civilian location, whether it be a police, sheriff, county, needs help with something. and they don't have the resources to do it themselves or the specialty to do it themselves. Let's say an elderly person gets lost in the woods and they have gone through the resources they have and they need some more manpower. Well, they will come up to the state and ask the state, we need resources. And the state will come down to the state defense forces. Do you have people in that area that can help? And then we'll provide support to that sheriff or that police. In some instances, they need help with crowd control, such as a major event like the Super Bowl, and we'll provide support to that. So we'll do civilian support. We'll also do support to FEMA and FEMA agencies when FEMA comes to the National Guard and says we need support. And we'll talk about the COVID missions, which is the state of Georgia, did bring on several National Guard units and members, hundreds of them, to support COVID support around the state. But there was so much need that the National Guard couldn't cover it all. Plus, the National Guard was only allowed by presidential order and by the governor to bring on so many headcount because that's what they could pay for. So we're the extra expanded force for the National Guard, providing support, in this case, in food banks, in decon missions for nursing homes, in assistance to medical facilities, entry to medical facilities, doing screening to entry, building mortuary trailers for expanded capabilities for hospitals, and many other activities that we were asked to do.
Let's go into that then. Let's talk about some of the specific missions that your team accomplished. Now, I know that you received an award, the Georgia Distinguished Unit Ribbon, and if you can tell us a little bit about that.
The Georgia State Defense Force received the first ever Georgia Distinguished Unit Ribbon that the Defense Force has ever received. This was a state award, not a Defense Force award. So there's different types of awards you can get in the military. You can get federal awards if you're a federal person. I got a lot of fruit salad on my uniform from federal ribbons. But our state defense force is so well embedded into the National Guard and into the support of the state that we have direct support both to the governor, to the TAG, and to the citizens through FEMA of the state. And in this particular case, the National Guard saw fit to give us a state joint unit ribbon for all the support we provided. The State Defense Force is expected to be a force that will come on the ground and support the state for 72 hours. Let's go back to the hurricane. It takes the National Guard 72 hours to get activated, to get on the ground somewhere. So the State Defense Force here in the state of Georgia is expected to cover from 0 to 72 hours. That's our surge. A lot of our people work full time. They can't afford, we don't get paid when we're doing State Defense Force stuff. Other states, like the state of California, actually pay their State Defense Force members. In the state of Georgia, everything we do is 100% voluntary, is 100% internal cost. Now, we do pay sometimes for travel, for hotel, for lodging, for food, or provide that more likely than pay for it. But when I take off from work, I'm not getting paid. No one's paying me to do that. I am volunteering my leave days to go do that. So we're expected to come on board and handle things for 72 hours, maybe another 24 to 48 after that. But that's all we're expected. That's the anticipation of the State Defense Force. However, during the COVID missions, the State Defense Force was activated for 124 days straight. We had members in the State Defense Force for over 4 months working COVID missions every single day. Now, we were able to do that because several of our State Defense Force members lost their jobs. So they volunteered their time to their community. We had other members that took off from their jobs to provide support. So we had 124 straight days, more than 9,000 man hours of support to the state at no cost to the state or the federal government. We supported over 30 missions, some of those missions being considerably long, 60 days long, at food banks, at cleaning of nursing homes, going from nursing home to nursing home. The National Guard would do the actual inside disinfecting, but when they came out, we would do all the decon. at food banks. We would literally go to the food banks, help the food banks. One, we would organize them a little better because they were all volunteers and they didn't really know how to do things in a more organized, quicker fashion. So we would just provide command support, but then we'd also provide personnel support, filling bags, unloading, loading. So we did all of this last year, giving us an amazing support to the state and to the nation because no one had to pay for it, no tax dollars. And like I said, that was the longest activation of the State Defense Force ever in the history of the State Defense Force. We provided more man days, more man hours in 1 year ever than we had ever done before. And we had an outstanding support from more than 300 active members of the State Defense Force and over 400 members of the Medical Reserve Corps, which we rolled into the State Defense Force for the period of time of last year.
That's amazing. That's a lot of work and a lot of organization. And you rely really heavily on a strong command staff to make something like that happen, to organize that. How is the Georgia State Defense Force organized? Are you in brigades? Are you battalions? How many units do you have that serve?
So we're just like the National Guard or any military organization. We have a headquarters element. I'm the commanding general. I have a G staff, a G1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. For civilians, that would be an HR person, an operations person, a logistics person. So I have a staff that works for me. Currently today, we work out of Dobbins Air Reserve Base. On the other side, where the Clay National Guard Center, where the National Guard headquarters is, we're on the base with the National Guard next to their headquarters. We have a building there. My command staff and I work out of there. We have brigades that cover the state of Georgia. We have 4 active brigades today from north to south. The state of Georgia is relatively large. It takes you 4+ hours to get from one end to the other. So we have brigades in different sections. Some of these brigades are rather large and have battalions underneath them. Some of the brigades actually, even though we call them brigades, are rather small in our rural communities where we don't have as many volunteers as we'd like. But we subdivide in brigades. We also have a support brigade, a medical group, an engineering group, a legal group, a chaplain group. They're all in our support brigade. So we have 5 distinct brigades. We also have an Op 4. Currently, it's not really a brigade or a battalion, but right now we have 4, and I'll call them infantry brigades, and 1 support brigade. So that'd give us 5 brigades. We have somewhere around 400 people on our register as State Defense Force members. We have 400 Medical Reserve Corps members that are on our State Defense Force books right now, but we'll be rolling them off after this pandemic. We're just being used as a conduit of command and control for them. And out of the 400 on our rolls, I would say we have 300 to 350 active participating State Defense Force members. And that increases and decreases depending on what's going on in the economy. And, our biggest job is to try to continue to increase the recruiting to get people into our community and into our product.
Do you have a maximum authorized strength for the Georgia
We'll
State
never
Defense
reach
Force?
that. Our governor wants us to double in size. Our governor wants us to get to 800 to 1,200 folks. We would love to get there. We'd love to compete with Texas and California. But in state size, Georgia is the 8th largest state with population in the United States. We, however, are the 3rd largest, competing with South Carolina and Tennessee, State Defense Force. We're the 3rd largest behind California and Texas. If you count our MRC folks, our Medical Reserve Corps folks that we added, that puts us around 800 folks, which would put us the 3rd largest State Defense Force, even though we're the 8th largest state in population.
Understood.
But our real numbers are around 350, 400. We'd like to get that 350, 400. We'd love to get that up to 800 to 1,000, but I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if there's enough volunteerism within the state of Georgia that we'll be able to get there. But I'd love to try, and that's one reason I'm on your podcast. I want you to spread the word.
Well, that's what we're doing here today, sir. So speaking of new members, what are the entry requirements? What does somebody have to do or be to be eligible to join the Georgia State Defense Force?
We are looking for all styles, types, shapes of personnel. Now, if you're wanting to join, you're going to have to pass a background check. You have to be in relatively appropriate shape. But I would not say that someone in a wheelchair can't come join us. We have staff jobs and office jobs that are appropriate for people that are not mobile. We're going to ask you to pass a little bit of a medical screening. Now, we have different duty levels. Duty level 1, which is very active, go through the wood with a backpack, to duty level 4, which is sit behind a desk and not deploy out to the field. So we have different duty levels. We'd like you to be within the height and weight standard of the military, but we are an all-volunteer force, and we will look at you, talk to you, and see how out of shape you are, how overweight you are, and we'll make a determination on a case-by-case basis. So what is the need? How can we meet that need is really what I ask for the person that's joining. And I would ask them, why do you want to join? What are you going to bring to the table? Why should we let you join our organization? We're a great organization that has a reputation, and you're going to come to our organization, and you got to keep our reputation. So if you put on a uniform, I'm wearing a uniform today for this podcast. If you're going to put on a uniform, you better look like you belong in the uniform. But we are looking into, just like the Civil Air Patrol, having an ability to bring someone on board and put them what I call into a corporate uniform, a non-Army uniform, a uniform of some sort that would allow them to serve. We've been looking into cybersecurity. My field of expertise is IT and cybersecurity. We've been looking into a civilian cyber corps, how we could help the state in cyber. But a lot of cyber people might have long hair and might have beards and might not want to be militaristic in nature and put on a uniform. So we have to decide as a Georgia State Defense Force how we can bring on some specialty skills, keep them under the guise and the organizational structure of a military organization, but still utilize those skills. The Civil Air Patrol has figured that out. They have 2 uniforms. They have the Air Force uniform with a little twist on it to make sure you know they're Civil Air Patrol versus Air Force.
The blue
and they have a corporate uniform that is for people that don't meet the military standards. So we're looking into that. I'm going to try to see if we can move that forward. Haven't been overly successful yet, but now that I'm the commanding general, maybe I'll be more successful.
Okay. You mentioned the background checks, and I'm being very familiar with that side of it from the recruiting side. When we put somebody into a state defense force, we're putting them into a position of public trust. We're going to put them into a place where the public sees a uniform and needs to be able to trust that they can come and receive aid. And not ever feel like there's a danger in going to that person in uniform. It doesn't matter that ours say Texas State Guard or Georgia State Defense Force on them. It's a military uniform. And the reason we wear the uniform is for that recognizability. The public eye sees us and they equate us with military, and there's trust that can be built there. So that position of public trust with the background check is very important. What would be the initial training or initial entry training for new members coming in?
So we usually have 3 different types of people that join the State Defense Force. And I would assume this to be true across all the defense forces throughout the nation. And as you were aware, there's only about 14 states that have active, vibrant defense forces. There's some other states that have some types of support, but really out of the 50 states, there's only about 14 states that have vibrant state defense forces. California and Texas leading the way, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee following right up in close third place. But most of the state defense forces are all the same. We have one type of person, a retiree that has done a full tour of service and is still wanting to give back. That's me. The second type of person all state defense forces have are people that were prior service that didn't spend a full amount of time in the service for one reason or another, got out, but still wants to give back. And the third type of person that comes to the State Defense Force is a total civilian, has never been in the military, has never been in a military organization, and they need to learn how to put on a uniform, how to salute, what the different ranks are, what they're getting into. So we have initial entry training, IET, initial entry training for every single person that comes into the State Defense Force. We want them to learn the standards of the State Defense Force. We have additional training after that for different skill sets, for different people. Now, if you're a prior service person and you just got out of the National Guard, the Reserve, or the active component, I'm not going to make you sit in the class that tells you what the different ranks are, unless you're a Navy guy and you need to learn what the Army stuff is. So there is some ways to get around the training we do at the beginning. But most folks, we want a standard. We want to be uniform across the organization. And that uniformity comes from uniform training. You asked me what brigades we have. Well, one of the other things we have is we have a TRADOC, a Training and Doctrine Command Organization. It's not a brigade. It's a standalone command by an 06 that runs our training. We have everything from initial entry training to NCO training to senior NCO training to officer training to senior officer training, just like the active component. We have the ability for someone that comes in with a degree that has special skills to either be direct appointed to an officer, a doctor that has a medical degree, a lawyer, a chaplain. We also have the ability for people to start as a private and go through officer candidate school, become a warrant officer or an officer. So we have a full breadth of training that we do. And we have a cycle for training. We have a 2-year training cycle calendar. So we don't offer everything every year, but we offer our initial entry training on a cohort basis, I believe about once a quarter, depending on how many people we get as volunteers that are joining. We also have developed for our rural community down south of Georgia, since Georgia's got a lot around the metropolitan Atlanta area, which is up north. But we have a need in the rural south to do more stuff. So we have started a training organization down south. So they don't have to drive all the way up to Atlanta for training. So we have different training that meets the needs of the different folks that are joining our organization.
So we talked a little bit about your response during COVID and the hurricane season. What do you think is the impact, your most recent service, on future developments for the Georgia State Defense Force?
Well, so we'll add two different areas there. One, we have to convince the state itself, the senators and congressmen and the representatives in the state house and the governor, that we're a valid, usable, organized defense force that's here for the community. And we have to convince every day, got to convince the community and the public that we're a worthwhile organization to have. So our number one mission is to convince the State House to continue to fund us. We get very minimal funding from the state of Georgia. And that funding is for the locations we're in, power, heat, water. The funding is for equipment, minimal amounts of equipment. The uniform I'm wearing today, I paid for it out of my own pocket. But if I'm going to wear a reflective vest and cut a chainsaw to cut down trees, the state provides that reflective vest. The state provides the chaps I need. The state provides the chainsaw I need. Those things that we need to a minimal extent, the state provides. We have a minimal budget that we are in the state budget for. And we have done such a good job over the last 5 years that our budget has increased year over year to a place, I think our budget right now is about $180,000 for all the state defense force. That's all we have. We don't have enough money for me to pay per diem, travel, every time we go someplace. We have actually gone back to the state house and showed them that their return on investment is about 5,000%. For the dollar they spend, they get $5,000 worth of man hour back. So we are the best bargain in town. We're much better than the National Guard in cost. We're much better than any other organization that FEMA can bring up to support the state. Hence, our budget has been increasing. I talked to the TAG. when he decided to pick me as the next commanding general, I asked, what do you want from us? How can we improve? What can we do better than what we're already doing? The governor himself is the one that swore me in as the commanding general. The governor knows who we are. I sit in on the TAG update brief every single month. I have a direct line to the TAG. I am considered one of the three primary components of the Georgia Department of Defense, behind the Georgia National Guard, the Army side, the Air Guard, and the State Defense Force. When the TAG has a meeting for strategic vision for the state of Georgia, I am sitting at the table next to the other generals. That is where our State Defense Force sits in the state of Georgia. And we only sit next to the TAG and next to the other component commanders because we have shown that we are worthwhile, we are cost effective, we are professional, and we have a standard that is equal to the standards they hold for their own troops. That was a real long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's a great answer. No, that's a great answer. That's amazing information, because I think that in the general public, there's the concept, and if all you have to do is Google State Guard to come up with the response that State Guards are a joke. It's a bunch of wannabes. It's a bunch of posers that are out there. And my experience, and what I'm hearing from you, it echoes that, is just very different. My experience is that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the National Guard, that we work side by side, hand in hand with them on a regular basis. We work on the same missions within the state. We're under the same command structure and authority structure as the National Guard. And to me, that's a key element in what our service is.
Several years ago, we had what I lovingly call ice-pocalypse. The Atlanta iced up. The interstates iced up. We're not used to that here in Atlanta. We got 1 inch to 2 inches of ice, and people got stuck on the interstate for 8 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours. Well, it wasn't a state of emergency because the next day the ice melted. And how long does it take the National Guard to get moving? 72 hours. The governor couldn't say, hey, National Guard, go out and rescue all these people, because it was like a 24-hour event. What he did say is, AGR, Active Guard Reserve, which are already full-time paid members, get a Humvee, go pick up 3 State Defense Force members, drive around the interstates handing out food and water. And when the news media showed the Humvee and the people in camouflage uniforms handing out food and water, the governor got praised that the National Guard did a great job. 80 to 90% of the people in uniform that you saw on TV and that did the mission were State Defense Force members. And unless you knew to look for the tag that says Georgia instead of U.S. Army, you would have never known. And I see that as a great benefit for the State Defense Force. That's who we are. We're behind the scenes. We're providing the exact same support. During a hurricane, the National Guard usually only goes out to clear the roads and help the sheriff. We do everything else. So we're helping with everything because, again, we're not getting paid, and we have volunteers that are skill set and are usually within that community, just like the National Guard. But the National Guard gets called up as units. So a unit may not be in the community. We get called up, and we call up not in, ask me how many brigades I have. I really don't care how many brigades I have, because I call up in task force. I say, who's here? Who can volunteer? You're all on this task force. And then we get ourselves an officer and an NCO, put them in charge of the task force, go get it done.
Do you think that the current climate, political, social, the unrest in the current state of the U.S., that will affect the Georgia State Defense Force and how you operate? Do you see any upcoming possible missions for that type of response?
So because of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is a federal act, military members, whether they be State Defense Force, active, reserve, or guard, only has a certain legal capability of what they can do within the borders of the United States. So when you see units being called up at the Capitol or called up within a state, those units are usually military police units. They're usually specific type of units that can do specific missions under the federal law. The State Defense Force cannot do policing actions under federal law. Now, can I help protect a parking lot? Probably, but I can only do certain things. You're not going to give a State Defense Force riot gear to do riot things in the state of Georgia. Different states may have different laws. Federal laws are at one level, then you have state laws. I don't see that as our mission. What our mission is to support the Guard. So maybe we'll feed them. Maybe we'll rotate them in and out and be transportation. Maybe we'll be logistics. We will support the Guard and the TAG and the state. So there's certain things we're going to do and there's certain things we're not going to do. When we talk about unrest, that's not an area the State Defense Force is in. When we talk about the COVID mission, that is exactly where the State Defense Force is. We have been asked to help provide shots. We have a medical unit. We have people that are doctors, nurses, and medical people that can augment providing shots. We're still doing nursing home stuff. We're still doing food bank stuff. We're not doing it right now because we've been given a breath of fresh air because we were on full-time service all of last year mostly. But right now we're very focused on COVID and civil support missions, not civil unrest.
We'll talk in just a minute about getting more information about joining the Georgia State Defense.
Let me tell you how I found out. Well, I was an active component person. I retired from the service, knew nothing about the State Defense Force in any states, in all the states I lived in. Never heard about it. So, I was in my 50s when my wife and I decided to stop by Dobbins Air Reserve Base and stop in at the commissary. I'm in the PX. I have a retired ID. I could get on the base. We were going to stop in the PX. I was going to just get my Army fix. And there's a Subway's right there in the PX. And, let's have lunch at Subway's. So we sat down and we had lunch at Subway's. I'm one of those typical retirees on base, taking advantage of my benefits. And I saw a patch that I had never seen before. Well, I fancy myself to know a good majority of the Army patches. That's one of the things I did while I was in the service. So I stopped the guy and I asked him, I said, I've never seen that patch before. What is that patch? And the guy told me about this organization that I had never heard about called the Georgia State Defense Force. He told me he was a volunteer. I looked at his uniform. I didn't even notice that it didn't say U.S. Army. He was in the same uniform as the reservists and the Guard. And he goes, yeah, I'm in an all-volunteer State Defense Force. I said, what's that? That is how I found out about the State Defense Force. I stumbled across it because I asked someone about their patch. I didn't hear about it in the news media. I didn't hear about it in the newspaper. I didn't get a direct solicitation. I didn't hear about it on a radio or a podcast. Didn't even know to Google search it because it didn't know it exists. And I'm a volunteer guy. I was in the Civil Air Patrol, and the Civil Air Patrol headquarters in the state of Georgia is the building right next to the State Defense Force building. Didn't know that. But I knew about the Civil Air Patrol because I got a lot of pilot friends here in my hometown, and I've seen it, and I knew about it, and I went. So I volunteered for that before I knew about the State Defense Force. That guy, by the way, that I talked to is my current JAG in the State Defense Force. He was a JAG back then. He has volunteered his time for the State Defense Force for more years than I. And he hooked me up with a recruiter. And here I am trying to figure out what I'm doing to hire more folks. I don't want folks to hear about the State Defense Force at a Subway on a reserve base because you're only going to get retirees. You're not going to get prior service. You're not going to get civilian. I want to get a billboard and put it downtown next to the Capitol saying, join the State Defense Force. It's an all-volunteer force. I want to get the word out. I want to come to a podcast like this. I'm a public speaker. I've written a couple of books. I wrote a book about my time at the Clinton White House. I've written some other books. I speak as keynote speakers at a lot of organizations and events. So my job this year in 2001 is to get the word out to the state of Georgia about the State Defense Force. And I'm going to speak at as many different locations, organizations, cities as I can, on as many podcasts as I can, radio, TV, and get the word out to the civilian on the street who the State Defense Force is in the state of Georgia. We are a military organization that provides support to you and your community.
That's such an important message to get out there. I think it becomes a really easy sell to convince somebody that service in a state guard is a great thing. And once you can get them on board with that, it becomes much easier.
Yep.
But it's that initial barrier to information that's a problem. I've had conversations over the past couple of months with a few small groups that are trying to get state defense forces organized in their state. Minnesota and Idaho come to mind immediately. There are active movements there to try to rebuild or reestablish deactivated state defense forces. What kind of advice would you give them? What are some of the key components or building blocks to building a state defense force?
You need to get a office time with the tag of your state. You need to go into the tag and convince the adjutant general of the state that he needs a third component command for his state's Department of Defense. You need to convince the tag that you can support him with an organized group of individuals that are professional. That's what you need to do. There's more than enough justification on what any state defense force can do, whether it's military to military missions, military to civilian missions. That justification is already out there. Getting volunteers and how to do that, that's already out there. You have to convince the tag that he needs you. Then after you convince the tag, then you have to convince your state House of Representatives that you can put together an organized group of individuals, that you are an organized group to support the state. During COVID, it's a perfect example of what you could use of what the State Defense Force can do. So, I look at Alabama. They had a State Defense Force and it was disbanded. It got disbanded because it didn't meet the needs of the state. We had several people from Alabama come across the border and join the Georgia State Defense Force. We got people in Tennessee that joined the Georgia State Defense Force, even though they have their own State Defense Force. We have people from Florida join our State Defense Force. So that tells me that recruiting and getting people to do the mission is not that hard. The hard part is convincing the upper management that you are a needed entity. And the upper management is the tag and elected officials within your state, because you got to have some top cover. You got to have the ability to cover your people if something happens to them while they're volunteering. So do you have workman's compensation for them? Do you have insurance for them? You don't have to pay them, but you have to give them some cover to be able to do the job. And the biggest problem that I've had with the civilian cyber corps is legally I can't get the cover I need. How can I get a person that doesn't have a CAC card, doesn't have a top secret clearance, to work on a top secret network? You can't. So some things are just a bridge too far. But to start a new state defense, matter of fact, I will volunteer to go to any state and help them with this discussion. I will volunteer to walk into the tag's office with anybody that wants to organize a state guard and help them. I got no problem with that. I think this is a valid way. And the more state guards we have across more states than the 12 or 14 or 16 that we have today, the more we can have discussion at National Guard Bureau, NGB, about treating us as semi-equal across the states. Right now, there's no one HR system for defense forces. Each state defense force has developed, made, purchased, or whatever, their own tracking system, whether it be on spreadsheets of their personnel. There's no standardization in uniform name tags. Some states have different color name tags. Some states use the same color as U.S. Army, and like ours say Georgia instead of U.S. Army, but it's the same color as the U.S. Army. Some states make it very obvious that they're different. So we need some uniformity across the State Defense Force. Yeah. SAUGUS, the State Guard Association, is starting to do that, but we need more of that. We need a packet that we can hand to all the other states saying, this is who the state guards are, and this is what it can do for your state. So I support other states doing what Georgia does. The biggest issue every state will have is getting the volunteers, getting the recruits.
So if somebody is listening to this today and they say, I've never known about this and I want to go join, how would they contact the Georgia State Defense Force to get more information for recruiting?
Well, we have a website. Google Georgia State Defense Force. On that website, there's a button that says recruiter. Hit that button and you'll get contacted by a recruiter. And that's the start. We don't want to just let anybody fill out a form. We want to talk to people. We want you to contact a recruiter and talk to someone and see if it's for you. And then the recruiter will send you a form. You fill out the form. We'll do a background check on you, and then we'll bring you in for a briefing and give you an overview of what the State Defense Force is. And then we'll see if you want to stay, and we'll put you into training.
And I just looked up that website, and it's paonews.net. And we'll put that in the show notes, and that'll be included. Also, as always, if anybody's interested from other states as well, you can always go to statedefenseforce.com, where we've got full resources on contacting any of the state defense forces out there with recruiting links and news. Sir, I really appreciate your time. This has been an amazing discovery of the Georgia State Defense Force. I've served in the Texas State Guard for 8 years, but didn't know anything about the Georgia State Defense Force. So it's really enlightening to know how active and involved you've been with COVID. It's amazing. I know that our state has been as well, and it's been neat to see that kind of response and that kind of deployment activity. I feel like state defense forces are becoming so much more a part of the mainstream response for emergencies. At least that's what I've seen here in Texas. And I hope that you're finding the same thing in Georgia.
Yep.
I really appreciate your time. I appreciate all of your information, and mostly I appreciate your service. And thank you for everything that you do for your state defense force and for state defense forces at large.
Well, I'm proud to serve. I'm ready to serve. My troops and myself are here to support our community and support the governor and support anybody in need. Now, those other state guards out there, if you need help, give me a call. Everybody can find me online. If you Google Mark Gelhardt, you'll find me. I'll be glad to help any state that needs help. The Tennessee State Guard is changing command. I'm hoping to go up there and be invited to his change of command. I want to know who my brothers and sisters are to the right and left of me. Right now, we're confined to our own states. In Tennessee and South Carolina, we can't go outside of our states. That's not our mission. But I do want to know who's to the right of me and who's to the left of me for the times of emergencies, for the hurricanes, the floods, to make sure our radio communications work from state to state. So thank you very much for interviewing me. Thank you for the time to listen to my stories. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And once again, our guest today has been Brigadier General Mark D. Gelhardt, Sr., Commanding General of the Georgia State Defense Force. Thank you, sir.